want to welcome you. Thank you to everybody for coming along, and I'm going to pass on to the book publisher, Ms. Di Page.
Thanks very much, Laura, and welcome to everyone for joining us today, especially on World Social Work Day for the launch of our new book, Social Work and COVID-19. It's my job to introduce you to our editor, Dr. Denise Turner, who will be hosting this evening. Denise was the person who came up with the idea for the book, and she did a phenomenal job. I'm not quite sure how galvanizing everybody to such a fantastic team of authors to write their chapters at record time. And then she, especially along with Amanda, has done an amazing job at promoting the book, keeping it going and getting discussions going on Twitter particularly. So I will hand you over to Denise for the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Di. And hello to everybody. Yes, for those of you that don't know me, my name's Denise Turner. And I'm really excited about this evening. It's a real privilege for me to be the editor of this book. So I thought I'd just tell you quickly a little bit about how the book came to be. I know there are other authors in the audience tonight, so other authors are available. It wasn't possible for us to have everybody speaking this evening, but it's really exciting to see you all here. The book started in the first lockdown, basically, which at the time we thought of as the lockdown. We didn't know what was to come. And the idea came through an online resource that we were using at the time that was very kindly supported by the wonderful Liz Howard, who I know is here this evening, and Baswa. And it was a resource that people shared their experiences on. And it got me to thinking that actually it would be nice to put together a book that shared people's experiences in a similar way. Although at the time, as I say, this was March last year, I had absolutely no idea how long we would be in lockdown for. I couldn't have imagined that we'd still be doing this here today. So I was so lucky that Di, who you've already met, and Critical Publishing ran with this book so enthusiastically, so efficiently. We basically turned it around from idea to first drafts in about 6 months. And the reason for that is that everybody was so generous with their time. And the main thing that I want to say here this evening is just a huge thank you to everyone who contributed to this book. As I've said, we couldn't have everyone speak tonight, but I know, you know, that many of you are here, so a huge shout out to you. And also to those of you that are here this evening and have bought and supported this book. We're so grateful to you, and it's our hope that it is an accessible little book that brings together experiences at this time. And in the spirit of Ubuntu, which I know is the theme for this year's World Social Work Day, I also want to give a shout out to other people that are launching things this evening. I know that there is the launch of Outlanders, which is Siobhan McLean and Wayne Reed's book. So a shout out to them as well, and good luck with the book, which I know they won't need. And my last thank you really goes to Amanda. I'm about to hand over to Amanda to talk about her chapter, which is such an important chapter because it charts the digital shift. Here we all are experiencing that digital shift as I speak, and all the things that we've had to learn in the last year. But before I hand over to Amanda, I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to Amanda and to Laura and to Queen's University for putting this event on tonight. I know some of you will dip in and out. If you're staying with us, there'll be an opportunity to win a copy of the book. If you DM Di on her Twitter and nominate people that you would like to give a copy of the book to, please do that. And finally, just thanks to all of you for being here and for supporting this little book. So I'm going to hand over now to the wonderful Amanda Taylor-Bezic.
Hi, Denise. Thank you very much for your lovely introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to use what digital skills I have to be able to pull this together. So hopefully it will go smoothly. And as Laura said, if it doesn't, you can definitely blame Laura. But anyway, what do I want to talk about? So I don't want to take a lot of time about this. Really, I just, in a few words, to talk about why I got involved with this book. Well, firstly, I guess because Denise asked me. Secondly, because she told me who else was going to be involved. And really because Critical Publishing are fantastic to work with. I've worked with them before and they're absolutely wonderful. Di and our colleagues are brilliant, brilliant publishing houses most of us know to work with. And more importantly, it was an opportunity for me to think about and think carefully about social work's pandemic-driven digital turn. For a long time, I've been talking about the digital and the social work and the relevance of the digital and social work. And in fact, I went to work in Queen's basically for that purpose around my digital expertise. And I don't think any of us knew that that would need to come to the fore as quickly as it actually did. But for those of you who have read the book, you'll have noticed that I have used a pre-pandemic, a pandemic and post-pandemic frame to structure this chapter. To think for me about what social work looked like pre the pandemic in terms of education, practice and its methods, and the shift in terms of digital education, digital practices and digital methods, and then the implications of this for how much those reimagined practices and methods we might take forward in our future as a profession, and those that we might absolutely want to leave behind. And more important of all, to that conversation is who will decide. There's a raft of literatures that evidences the troublesome knowledge and the troublesome relationship that social work has with technologies. And mostly that is related to problematic data management systems and recording systems that in lots of ways keep social workers from the job that they want to do, being in front of people and with people, in proximity to people, being physically present, building relationships in a non-mediated way. So whilst we continue to use digital technologies as a crisis response, I would very much advocate for the commissioning of usable, ethical and workable technologies as we go forward, and urge practitioners in social work to consider carefully the implications of new and emerging technologies on the people that we serve. Data mining, scraping, automation bias is our business as social work, and I am ready to take a more activist stand in that space. In terms of socio-technical capitalism, you'll probably have heard about my issues around the use of Zoom and how I protest loudly when anybody tries to drag me into that space. But just to finish, just from my chapter, I talk about that this chapter urges social work to engage more judiciously with the phenomenon that is digitalization. I call for the profession to be more attuned to not only its own digital future, but the implications of the digital on our collective futures, so that the integrity and efficiency of our profession and the value of humanity can on some level be preserved. So that's all kind of I wanted to share from my chapter. And I want to pass over to my colleague, Gemma, who I worked with very early into the pandemic at the Anna Freud, when we did a lovely session with Aaron Ballack and colleagues on protecting children. And that's what Gemma's going to focus on. So thank you, Gemma. Really looking forward to hearing from you.
Thanks, Amanda. So I'm Gemma Hadridge, and I co-wrote one of the chapters in the book on protecting children during the pandemic. I guess how I got involved in this chapter is Denise was actually one of my lecturers when I studied social work like 7 years ago. Also marked my dissertation as well, so things have changed quite a lot, where I'm writing for quite different reasons for Denise to read it now. I guess part of why I'm still kind of thinking about Denise and the impact she's had on me is the different projects we've been involved in over the last few years, which includes the events that Amanda just mentioned, which are a seminars series that we hosted at the beginning of the pandemic at the Anna Freud Centre on how to protect children in times of uncertainty and loss that we were facing because of COVID-19. And one of the reasons I did that is because I was really inspired by a seminar that I went to run by Still Point Spaces, where it was a shared learning space. And I think for me, I wanted to kind of create that shared learning space for others too. So we held these events, and then Denise, when she kind of came up with this book, also asked us to write in it too. So we wrote a chapter, myself and some of my colleagues that were working in
child protection and kind of frontline edge of care social work, wrote a chapter on our experiences. And I guess one of the things that I'm thinking still is really in my mind and is very much related to where we are now a year later is actually the final paragraph of the chapter, where we say that it's crucial to recognise the toll on practitioners of working during the pandemic conditions. We cannot emphasise enough the importance of setting up structured time with teams and across services to help mitigate feelings of isolation and anxiety. To establish links with practitioners across the country and the world would also provide invaluable insights into new ways of working. And finally, setting up non-team specific networks might be a helpful way of promoting an environment for general reflective practice along thematic lines rather than a focus on specific clinical work. This not only supports and contains practitioners, but can rejuvenate practice, which in turn can promote innovative and safe practice. And I think for me, I'm really struck that that's where we are today. Again, thanks to Denise and Amanda, and for everyone that's here on a Tuesday evening, if you're in the UK, to be able to have a space to think through and try and be creative. I think one of the things that I've taken forward since writing that chapter is the real importance of trying to get a balance of things. I'm sure I'm not alone in that. We're thinking of the balance of work and personal life, the balance of when we need self-care and when we actually just need other people to help us think through a problem or process some of the emotional impacts of our work when we might be alone in our own homes. But definitely one thing we maybe need to continue to think about, and the digital world helps with that now that we've really excelled in this last year, is the connection with those networks and thinking about how we can have these spaces to learn and think together and to try and find ways to feel safe in what can feel like a very unsafe time, both emotionally and within our own physical health too. And to be able to hold that uncertainty. And I'm really glad to be here today because I think spaces like this do exactly that. So I feel really honoured to be here today and to have been able to have a chance to write in the book too. And I'm now going to pass over to Denise.
Thanks, Gemma. I'm so proud of Gemma. I'm so proud of all the students that I've worked with. Gemma is flying the flag for them here tonight. She was always one to watch. And if you've read the book, you'll know that we also have a wonderful chapter 6, that is written by Andrew Lorimer, Rachel Sharples and Frances Sentamu, which is, I think, one of the most powerful chapters in the book as well. So for those of you that are students and for those of you that are involved in social work education, really important chapter to look at. So thank you, Gemma, for that. Gemma knows this, but I always just say I'm so proud of her. So I'm going to hand over now to Laura, who's going to show you a video from our colleague, Dr. Prospera Tidham. Prospera, as many of you will know, is in the United Arab Emirates, and we tried very, very, very hard to get Prospera here and to have a time that worked for everybody, but unfortunately it wasn't possible. So Prospera has very kindly made a wonderful video for us, which Laura is going to share with you now.
Hello, good evening. My name is Prospera Tidham, and I'm delighted to be joining you for the launch of our book, Social Work and COVID-19, Lessons for Education and Practice. As a researcher, I have been interested in areas around race and racism for about 15 years. And in this period of time that I've been researching these areas, I have found that there has been a steady growth of literature and research that share the voices of some of the marginalized groups that we work with in social work. In terms of the focus on students, I have a background from my doctorate where I examined the placement experiences of Black African students in England. That thesis is very much available and in the public domain. But today I want to draw our attention to and focus on the chapter that I provided for this book. But my chapter is entitled "We Just Don't Matter." That's quote unquote, articulating the experiences of Black African social work students during the COVID-19 pandemic in England. And it seemed a natural progression for me to look at the experiences of Black African social work students during COVID. And I say that because of the information and the research that suggested that Black and minority ethnic people appeared to be experiencing COVID in much more severe forms than other groups, and that they represented a high number of people who died or who lost their lives to the COVID pandemic. I became concerned then about how Black African students would be progressing on placements in the context of COVID. And I set out and I put out a call for participants for this piece of research. Now, what I represent in this book is one part of the story, because I interviewed practitioners and students. And the research about practitioners will be coming out shortly in the British Journal of Social Work. However, for this chapter, I focused on student social workers. For today, I want to focus on this quote by one of the participants called Naomi. This is what Naomi had to say in regards to her placement experiences and her experience with her university. She said, "My placement tutor responds to all my emails. She may not have the answers, but she replies by emails. I am so grateful for that, because I know that this is not the experience for everyone. I had an assignment which was linked to my placement. She was nice about it. She told me to put it on hold, obviously, because placement was suspended." What I want to talk about briefly today is this idea of gratitude, this feeling of gratitude, this desire to be grateful for everything that occurred to Naomi. And it is something that I have seen as a pattern, and quite a concerning pattern, among some of the students and the practitioners that I have worked with and interviewed for my different pieces of research. There is a sense of gratitude even for things that you and I would perhaps think are just part of the job. So my tutor responds to my emails. Hello, I actually did think that that was part of the job, especially within the COVID pandemic, where people didn't know what they needed to be doing, and there was lots of anxiety and concern about progress. So I just wanted to share that and to add that we need to work in ways that ensure students understand what is expected of them, but also they come to appreciate that we recognize what their roles are in our own role, in our own jobs. But also, I think what's important, particularly looking at this quote, is this idea of gratitude, which can actually stray into very high levels of deference. And it's okay to be grateful. It's okay to acknowledge that somebody has done something to support you. But when it comes as part of their main job, I became or have become quite concerned about why particular students feel the need to articulate this in the way they do. So for this particular student, the entire interview was about gratitude, and I don't want to leave this book launch today giving the impression that I don't support gratitude. I absolutely do. I think there are ways of showing gratitude, or expressing gratitude that doesn't feel over the top, that doesn't feel that they weren't actually expecting to get a response. And I think this is what the student says here. She says, I know that's not the experience for everyone. Clearly what she's saying here is there are some students who never get responses from their tutors. So I am grateful that she responded to my emails. So in order to move us on, I would just like to add that for me, one of the reflections and recommendations that I have contributed in this chapter is that I would like us to use this information, I'd like us to use this research in improving, changing, amending our own practice with ethnic minority students, and I speak specifically here about Black African students. So if you're interested in hearing a bit more, please listen to the rest of today's events, and please do get the book.
Okay, so thank you so much to Prospera. I was just saying in the chat that Prospera's illustrating Amanda's points there, and we're showing how technologically capable we are. And thank you so much again to Laura for managing all of that. I'm realizing that as I'm speaking and as I'm introducing different people, I'm saying that their chapter was my favorite chapter in the book, and I've realized that they're all my favorite chapters in the book. And a big shout out to Kish, who I know is here this evening, Kish Batty Sinclair, and her chapter is such an important one on the experience of asylum seekers and refugees. And also to my great colleague and co-author Marie Price, who also contributed a chapter on supervision in end-of-life care. But one of my other favourite chapters in the book was written by Autumn and Ariane, who wrote a wonderful chapter on poetry. And poetry helps in social work. And I'm going to now hand you over to them.
Thank you so much, Denise. It's so lovely to be here with everybody this evening. What a nice way to celebrate World Social Work Day. I'm going to say a little bit about our chapter, read a tiny section from it, and you'll be unsurprised to share a few poems, and then pass over to Autumn, who'll do something similar from her perspective. So I think the reasons that I became involved in this book were twofold. One was to do with, as other people have said, relationships. So relationships with people who are involved with this book, and with my co-author Autumn, who we've known each other a long time, but hadn't had the opportunity to write together before we started writing about poetry. So it was just a lovely opportunity to write something together. And the other reason is that for me, this book really is like a little microcosm of the space that I like to work in that it's got contributions from academics, but it's also got contributions from social work students, from people who use services, from practitioners, and that's the kind of space that I really like to be in, where we all bring our knowledge to bear. And so what I'm going to talk about really relates to that, and it's about the idea of evidence. And so I'm going to start with a poem by Wendy Cope, which I've used quite a lot, called Evidence, and it's from Anecdotal Evidence, the collection. And it begins, "A great deal of anecdotal evidence suggests that we respond positively to birdsong," and that's a quote from the Daily Telegraph. "Centuries of English verse suggest the self-same thing. A negative response is rare when birds are heard to sing. What's the use of poetry, you ask? Well, here's a start. It's anecdotal evidence about the human heart." So as COVID-19 caused lots of difficulties for us all, and I think caused particular difficulties for social workers, where we rely on connections between one another to do our jobs, then Autumn and I had already been sharing poetry. And so it became, I suppose, just heightened that sense of poetry as a source of connection and as a source of evidence on how we were experiencing the pandemic and how we might respond helpfully to it. So in the chapter that we contributed to this book, there's a section with a bit of a justification or a rationale for the arts as part of social work education and practice. And I'll read just a few lines from that. So social work's knowledge base has always been informed by both arts and sciences, particularly the social sciences. And some authors have argued that the two are complementary. For example, Graybill describes how the arts can fill the gap that remains when the explanatory power of evidence-based practice has been exhausted. Damianakis also argues for social work being informed by a balanced synthesis of art and science. And Goldstein, a very influential advocate for the connection between social work and the arts, argued that the arts themselves provide empirical reports of the human condition. And this is an idea that's echoed in Wendy Cope's poem, Evidence, which I just read to you, which characterises poetry as a form of anecdotal evidence of human nature. And it makes the provocation that science too can be accused of telling us things that we already know. And so I think that sometimes where we feel that perhaps science lets us down, the arts are a form of recourse and comfort, much as I'm extremely grateful to science also for the vaccine, for example, and getting us out of this pandemic. So I'm going to finish my comments just with a short poem from Outlanders, which, as Denise already mentioned, is also launching this evening, and really, really enjoying this collection and have so much time for Wayne's work and the work he's done over the last year. It's a poem called A Day in the Life of a Social Worker by Alicia May. I don't know Alicia, but I just love this poem as a story about what it's been like working through the pandemic. Eyes open, a commute on your tiptoes, dodging the virus, meetings, Microsoft Teams, masks. Navigate a whirlwind of emotions, get placed on a pedestal, get knocked down, get back up, hold someone's hand, wipe someone's tears, wipe your own tears, wipe your colleagues' tears, catch someone's smile, watch them grow, keep someone safe. The little steps, the small wins that keep you afloat. A day punctuated by the to-do list that never ends, the service user who takes control of their life, the government who oppressively tie your hands behind your back. Sip a cocktail of hope, determination and exhaustion, a commute on your tiptoes, dodging the virus, eyes closed. Thank you very much, and I'll pass over to Autumn now to say a little more.
That was really so good, wasn't it? It's nice to see you all. I'm Autumn Resch-Marsh, and I'm the other author of the chapter about poetry and social work. And both Ariane and I have been tweeting a lot of poems, as some of you might know, under the hashtag Poetry Helps. And I guess I encourage you to join in that. If you like poetry and you feel it's nourishing, you can share it. And it's definitely been a lifeline to me and to a lot of practitioners that I know through the pandemic. Ariane read a couple of really lovely poems, and I wanted to read a couple of very, very short ones. I wanted to say, I suppose, something about how I've been using poetry in my teaching as a social work academic through the pandemic. And we talk about this in the book. And I think one of the challenges has been to create a sense of community between people who have never physically been together. And at Edinburgh, we have a lot of international students. They've come from afar to a foreign country to have this lovely experience of studying social work in a beautiful city. And they found themselves locked up in student residences. And it's been pretty grim. And our course is very demanding. And we found that by sharing poems, it helps to create some sense of community. And I think that's partly because poetry helps to create a sense of empathy and connection. And a lot of the poems that Ariane and I both use in our teaching are about bringing the lived experience of people to the fore. And poetry has a way of very succinctly and often in a very visceral way connecting us to the lived experience of people that are very different to us. And I wanted to commend to you in particular a collection that I've been using recently, which is called Stares and Whispers. And it's a collection of poems by deaf and disabled poets and writers. And I just wanted to read a short poem in it because I think it touches into this bit about lived experience and how do we connect to that and how do we help our colleagues and our students and also the people that we work with who we might call service users. Those people often sharing poems with them as well can help people feel less alone in their experience. So this is by a poet named Claire Cunningham, and it's called First Contact. Under a gentler hand, with heat, with soul, with touch that gives as it takes, And when I'm held in the palm of your hand, I am all there, entire, whole, not broken in pieces, to be held up to the light, to be looked through. I am on file. You have the right to read me. And I absolutely love this way this poem helps us think about what it's like to have your life recorded by somebody else, to be written up in reports and not to have control and ownership over that. And I think certainly for some of my students, it's spoken to that place and help them empathize with what that experience is like. And hopefully they'll be more compassionate in their practice as social workers. And the other poems that I wanted to quickly tell you about is during the pandemic, we partnered with the Scottish Poetry Library, and we asked people to submit poems inspired by social work in different ways. And we made a selection of those poems, which was really difficult because it's hard to say no to anyone's poem. But we selected a group of those poems, which are now available on the Scottish Poetry Library website, and we'll put the links into the chat in a minute, so you can go and read those in your own time. But one of those poems which I wanted to read to you is written by a retired social worker named Alistair Finlay. Again, it's a very short poem, but it's from his collection Dancing with Big Eunice, and it's called Charity. Charity. Students I'd make write essays on their feelings, attitudes, beliefs. Is it part or not of the gift relationship their tutors keep harping on about? Or a throwback, soup kitchens, carding for lice, impetigo, Christmas Day in the workhouse? Spell out how you've spent 12 months of the year saying no to the underclass. Then for one day only, open all the doors, burst out the boxes for the poor. I remember when in 1973, a 15-pound turkey was donated by a man who wanted to deliver it himself, yes, to the chosen ones. It would not go in the oven, the gas for which had been disconnected. Discuss. So again, the pandemic has highlighted our social inequalities, and it's made those worse, and we see that on the front line in social work. But again, this poem from Alistair Finlay shows us these are not new issues, but we have to continue to return to these issues of social inequality and help our colleagues and our students to understand those and to think about what we can do as social workers to ameliorate those. So I just want to thank Denise and my friend Ariane for being part of this book. And I hope that our chapter will encourage more social workers to read poetry, to connect with poetry. It can be soothing, it can be helpful, it can be a way of teaching and learning. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and hopefully we'll have more conversations about poetry and other books continuing with the social work book group online. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Ariane and Autumn. That was totally mesmerising. It was hard to tweet anything when you were speaking or just not be with you in the space. I probably want to reapply to do my social work training where you both teach and attend your classes, because the depth with which you articulate in the book and here this evening was quite something. But at this point, we were really keen that we would hear from the people who are with us too. So we wanted to ask that we could get more interactive really with all of you who have arrived, all of you have turned up to spend this time with us. We're really grateful for you being here, but we also wanted to interact with you. So we wondered if you'd use the chat. My colleague Laura is going to put some questions in the chat in a second, and it's just to just talk about, really share some, so that we can get a sense too of where you are with the pandemic. We have spent this time really sharing about how the pandemic has impacted on us in different ways and how we've captured that in the book, but also we're interested to hear how you have experienced the pandemic in whatever role it is that you occupy in our profession. So if you would use the chat, and you can maybe direct questions if you wish to various authors, but we're really keen that people just make a comment about, what is the things about the pandemic that has really kind of impacted on you. And we'll just monitor the chat as a team. I think Ariane, Gemma, Denise, Autumn, you might come on the camera and we can go through the comments that people are making and respond. And Laura's just put in the question there, how have you engaged with the pandemic and how have you felt the impact, or anything at all about the pandemic that you want to share with us or ask questions about? We'd be really keen to hear from you. It's always that people don't like to be the first one to put in the chat, but please do share with us. Or if you think it's quicker and we don't have like 130 people just speaking at the one time, you could bob on and say a quick mention or question. Stick on your mic and your camera if you wish, and then just turn it off again.
Someone's put their hand up, Amanda.
Okay.
It's me, Amanda Lisa. I'm not going to put my camera on, but
please do.
I've got no function for chat on mine, so that's maybe why you're not getting no messages. I can't see the chat, so that's maybe a reason.
Okay, listen, thank you for telling us. And Lisa, it's so lovely to hear your voice.
To hear my voice.
It's so lovely. It's been such a long time. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. I'm trying. I'm on both. I'm on Zoom and I'm on Twitter, on Teams at the same time.
Multitasking.
Yeah. I could maybe share something I've learned.
Yes, please. Yes.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, I connected with yourself last year, didn't I? Beginning of last year. Actually, it was 24th of April. Was Parents of the Revolution over in Blackpool.
You did.
And we've done really well since, getting on a platform and connecting with parents and, you know, empowering them to get on this virtual platform and move forward and give them interview skills, and we've given them lots of experiences. It's been really good. We've embraced it and we've run with it. Less than 12 months.
That's quite amazing, and I can't believe that you remembered the date. I do remember the conversation very well, and it was around, you know, how are we going to continue supporting parents in the community of Blackpool whilst we can't be in a physical space with them. So it's really lovely for me to hear that feedback, actually, and hear that that work's still going on, and the digital has mediated that.
Yeah. And it's just I've been reflecting on it myself, you know what I mean? It's been less than 12 months and how far we've gone is tremendous. It's absolutely brilliant. We're interviewing social workers, you know, we're throwing out this Blackpool Families Rock, you know, we're moving forward with everything there, and we're building relationships everywhere. It's been really good.
That's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Lisa. I really appreciate it. Lovely to hear your voice.
Yeah, thanks for helping me along the way.
No problem at all.
So. That's maybe why you're not seeing anything in the messages, though, because I can't see chat, so that's maybe what the people are experiencing. Teams.
You might jump in on that.
Somebody's phone's ringing. Can I suggest, Amanda, that people raise their hands?
Yeah, absolutely.
If they want to ask a question as well, because the chat's actually really busy.
Okay, so Cameron, you've got your hand up. Do you want to ask a question?
Hello, good evening. I'm probably speaking on behalf of lots of other people. I don't have any access to the group chat.
Sorry about that, but and do you want to make a comment other than that, Karen, while you're here? Because we'd be really pleased to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I know that I'm a lecturer, a social work lecturer. And I am aware that some of my students are online this evening, listening to you all and hopefully learning quite a lot as well. And they've had the experience of being in the classroom and then having to go online, which has been a challenge, not only for them, obviously doing homeschooling and everything else that people have going on in their lives. But for me as a lecturer, I found it really difficult. Teaching online. Social work is about, you want to be with people, don't you? Yeah. You want to be talking to a face, not to a machine. Yeah. And you know, and I think it's been challenging for all of the educational establishments. But I suppose I just want to give a shout out to my students, really. How proud I am that they've embraced the online learning with all of its challenges, and with lecturers who don't have the same level of IT skills that they do either. But yeah, so I wanted to just give those guys a huge shout out, how proud I am of them.
Thank you so much. That is really lovely to hear. It's really nice to interact with you as well, Karen.
Thank you.
I'll just take then, let's see, other hands. Carol Suffolk.
Yes, good evening. I'm from the University of Kent, and what's happening is I'm working with the apprentice social workers, and that obviously all their learning is online. So that's been a different format for myself, and having to embrace all the technology and all the problems that are around this as well. And what we've been discussing in supervision with the students, and also some of the direct observations that are coming up next week, that a few of them are actually doing a presentation on working under COVID as a social worker, which is actually quite interesting to hear. And some of them have been raising the questions of the problems of embracing the technology of Teams and adhering to confidentiality. Because if they're having a conversation with somebody, they don't know if anybody else is in the room, and having to be creative and maybe ask for a safe word so they know they're actually speaking to that person, or there's nobody else in the room. So it's been interesting how they've been dealing with certain issues.
Yeah, and those are really important points, Carol. And I think there has the translation of kind of what we do into the digital space has definitely been a challenge for us all. Even people who would assume themselves to be fairly digitally equipped have struggled to make that translation. And I think that's some of the point that I was making about, you know, what methods do we really want to hold on to? Which ones do we want to leave behind? And actually, who decides? And I think that's, we must hold that very close to us as we move into, which will become a post-pandemic phase. But those are really important points. And the wrangling, you know, in lots of ways is a normal kind of thing. But, you know, social work has responded to every industrial revolution since the start of time. That's how we came around, isn't it? And I think that this one has been the rapidity and the scale, you know, that it's just been very, very difficult to manage, to say the least. But, you know, we must applaud each other in terms of, and be gentle with each other about these transitions. We're coming into this place where we still have to do this for a while yet. And I think that kind of tolerance of the space, tolerance of each other, has been a test to us all, really. But thank you for sharing your contributions. And I'll go over Sue Lightbone. You still there, Sue?
Hello, Amanda. I just wanted to say hello.
Hiya, Sue.
Shout out for Lancashire, and
this is like a reunion for me. I'm really sorry, it's colleagues.
And how much I've enjoyed the book, and yeah, just big shout out for the folks I'm working with at Lancashire still. Jane, I know she's watching, doing lots of work with students and training practice educators, and it was lovely to read the book and know that Jane and I have been talking about the things that you're all talking about. So thank you. Just lovely to see you again.
See you. Thank you so much for saying hello.
Thank you.
Liz, I'm just going to go over to you. You're just on mute. You just on mute for a second. If you wave your cursor on the screen, it should bring up a wee toolkit. Just wave it around it, or else up at the top sometimes. Just look for a wee microphone. Sometimes it's at the top right-hand corner. For some people it's on the middle of the screen. No, you can't see it. Knock the screen in a minute. I'll go to the chat and then come back to you. How's that? So Denise, you've been monitoring the chat. Oh, it's not letting you unmute. Oh, hold on.
Liz, I might suggest if you just leave the meeting and then rejoin again, sometimes it will
back in.
Yeah, it's like turning off.
Thank you for that, Laura.
Yeah, I have been monitoring the chat. I've been trying to. And actually, I don't think this evening would have been the same if we hadn't said to somebody, "You're on mute," would it?
No.
I think that's so important. We haven't had anyone that's a cat yet or anyone that's upside down. But I do think as part of the evening, it's really important that we have at least one person who we say to you're on mute. So I'm aware, Amanda, that there's lots and lots of talk in the chat about students. We do have some students I know here tonight, so if anybody wants to share their experience on the mic or respond to any of the messages that there have been in the chat about students, I think it looks from what I've been seeing that it's hit student social workers really hard, this. And I think, that links into so many of the chapters in the book. It links into your chapter, Gemma, about safeguarding and some of the things that you've written around being at home and your experiences, I know, with the little boy. And of course, with your chapter, Amanda, on the digital. But then again, also thinking about ways that we look after ourselves in that as well. So, I think we've all got a big task, haven't we, in thinking what we do. Because, like I said at the beginning, we're still here a year later, and I think we have to be very careful in just thinking, well, we're all going to go back to normal. That's my big sort of hobby horse thing. I'm not sure that we are, and I think that we have to respond to that in some way and be responding to social work students particularly. So some other people have raised their hands, Amanda, and Liz is saying it's working now.
Oh, Liz, do you want to? Yeah.
Oh, hello. That's better.
Yes.
I felt really technically incompetent then. I was like, where's the microphone? It's just like not working. So thank you for being patient and for the top tip. And it's great to be here and hear from some of the contributors tonight. Absolutely fantastic. And well done everyone on the book. It's brilliant and a really valuable contribution, particularly at the time that it's come out, and really well needed for us all in social work. So thank you. I just wanted to make a comment about, the online world and what I'm seeing through the work that I'm doing, which is I run the Adult Social Work Forum for BASWA members who are in adult social work each week. And every week we get new challenges and new dilemmas coming through that people are experiencing in terms of working in the online environment and really struggling around the limitations that actually brings and how that can really impact on the professional judgments that people are making. And they're really struggling with how to kind of square that working in that way to kind of enable communication. But then there's the real ethical challenges when they can't get the information that they need through the kind of the technology and its limitations and their limitations in terms of their own practice. So I think there's more of that to come, and I think that supporting each other, like you were saying, Amanda, being kind to each other, giving each other space to talk about those experiences and support each other and guide each other's practice is really, really key. So thank you.
Thank you for that, Liz. And there's nothing I disagree with. I absolutely agree. It's been a challenge for everybody, but I think there are methods that we might want to consider in terms of going forward, in terms of mediated spaces. That we've always had a problematic relationship with technologies for various reasons, really. But this, I think, has helped us to kind of think about where we can exploit it for social good, and we shouldn't exploit it where we can for social good. But when it's a problem, and also we shouldn't be taking broad stroke to we're going to do this with these sorts of people now for this reason. That's just not appropriate. And we had a great talk at Research and Practice last week about this, at a talk I did around adult social care and various methods that we could kind of think about. So I appreciate your contributions. Ariane, Gemma, Autumn, do you want to pick up on any of the points that are in the chat or some of the things that people have said? And I know we've got a couple more hands up. We can come back to them in a second. I just wondered if there was anything you particularly wanted to respond to.
I guess one of the things that's really struck me has been the way in which we've lost out on the informal support that happens in office spaces around photocopiers, on the way to the toilet, when you're making a cup of tea. And that's been for students on placement. They can't overhear experienced workers having conversations and things, oh, that's the way to do that, or to grab someone and ask a question more informally. But I've also found that as an academic, not having that informal chats about student well-being. One of the things we did is we created a listening space that meets every other week for our staff, and it doesn't have an agenda, and it happens every week at the same time. And actually, it's been really well used. And again, it's just a place to kind of say how you're feeling, how you're doing. Sometimes we're talking about students that we might be worried about or practice situation, but often it's just trying to somehow capture that informal stuff that happens over a coffee. And I guess that's the other thing that we really, if we're going to have more and more remote working, we've got to think of ways to look after each other, because it's very lonely and isolating, and there's a lot of learning lost and a lot of support lost.
I think that's a really important. I just put in the chat there that Ariane and I have been doing talking. So we walk and talk, and we cover a lot of ground in terms of our miles, but also in terms of, you know, just being there for each other, sharing experiences, thrashing ideas about or whatever, just in terms of academic support, and thinking things out, you know, and it really helps. But I think that's really important, that some of those things that we have lost, and the digital mediates that in lots of different ways, but we're fed up with being stuck in front of the screen. So I do think we do need to get creative, because as Denise points out, I'm not sure this is going to go away anytime soon. So therefore, how do we make that possible? And I think some people are talking on Twitter about don't start meetings until 10 past and finish at 10 to on the ball, you know, and also don't, this back-to-back meeting thing, it's not sustainable for us as a profession. I think one of the things that's really struck me through reading the book and being in this space tonight as well, and seeing the amount of people that are with us, is that there's a real need for people to be seen and be heard, and what they're navigating, which is huge, to be appreciated, you know. Ariane, you might come in on that as well, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I was just putting trying to put a bit in the chat about poetry. Some people have asked if you know, there was stuff. We don't have a workshop running at the moment, but if you would like to do a bit of work around poetry, then Autumn is keeping a kind of mailing list, so you're welcome to get in touch, and we hope to do a bit more around that. I suppose in some ways I feel somewhat guilty seeing the chat and the comments, because as an educator, because we know we're asking a huge amount of students, I think, day in, day out, and I guess that maybe there is room. It does make me feel this evening that there is room for us to do more work creatively and supporting one another, and just try to make that student experience as holistic and supported as we can, because that seems to have come up in quite a few different ways this evening, I guess, and we're just not used to we're just not used to becoming social workers in this kind of context, and as other people have said, it's just it feels very unnatural, but probably isn't going to change completely. Yeah, I think those were my reflections. I think maybe, is it Victoria Mazza wanted to come in? She can't put her hand up, but would like to come in. Do you want to come in, Victoria?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, it's working. Hi, I'm a student from London Met.
Welcome, Victoria.
Hello, thank you. Sorry, I just joined it a little bit later, so please forgive me.
Sure.
But I think, you know, as a student, obviously we know there's a lot of struggles going on, you know, trying to do a degree placement. And also, you know, there's a lot of people in our cohort who are mothers, fathers, having to homeschool. There's a lot of, you know, there's a lot of impact in that side. But I think for me personally, I've taken some positives from this pandemic, such as, you know, finding new creative ways on how to reflect and how to do direct work with children, and also building up my self-resilience as well in placement. So I think there are some positives to be taken from the pandemic and what we've learned, and it's not also negative.
Absolutely. Gemma, you might want to jump in there. That's kind of your speciality.
Yeah, I was I can feel myself in this when I'm listening. I can feel myself swinging from at one point thinking of all the challenges and the space to be able to process them and to feel heard and seen. I think all of us need that. And on the other side, I was thinking of some of the positives too. I started 6 months ago in a new social work role alongside my role at the Anna Freud Centre. So I had to get to know a whole new team virtually, whole new caseload virtually. Luckily, they were really high risk safeguarding cases. So lots of them we didn't have to see virtually. You know, that kind of thing was a bonus, that they were so concerning that we were still able to do visits. You know, that thing that people were looking for. I want the red risk cases so I know I can go see them. That kind of thing is, you know, the negatives. But what I found is, I think what I'd summarize as permission seeking for myself, for the families, that being more explicit, sometimes really tough, but actually being able to explicitly say, can you talk now? Has this meeting gone on too long? We can blame technology, but I'm getting a sense the emotions might be too much. So it's a nice, easy way for parents to say, I need a bit of a break. But also for us as a team, permission seeking to check in, can you handle this emotional offload from me? I'm not going to just keep on interrupting the colleague next to me. I'm going to find someone in my team who's available to help me think this through right now. I think those are some of the benefits that can also lead to those feelings of isolation, but holding on to what can be there as a positive. I think that kind of stuff's been crucial, and I will take forward even more explicitly, even when I'm not working at all virtually anymore, because I've seen its benefits in building relationships and helping emotions be regulated in really challenging work. So yeah, I'm trying to not sugarcoat it, but that's where my mind is now.
Thank you for that, Gemma. It's a really important contribution, and I think it's really reassuring as well when we can share those experiences as, you know, this is something that goes on and it's actually okay. You know, because I think people have been out there thinking, is this okay? Can I do this? You know, and really questioning kind of how we can navigate these spaces and take some control of them. Because in lots of respects, I think we're a bit frightened of kind of something going wrong, breaking the internet, you know, and it won't, you know. So your points are really important to that conversation, really. And John, I've realised that your hand's been up for a while. Ben, I'll come to you, and then Andrew. I'm sorry, I haven't been ignoring you. I've just been trying to go between the two spaces. So, John, are you still around?
Yes, I'm very much still around. And one of the nice things about online things like this is you don't get a sore arm holding your hand up, particularly when it got vaccinated today. So,
glad you've got your vaccine.
I just wanted to make maybe 3 points. I haven't read the book yet, but when I saw the title, I was really desperate to come. I'm a social work lecturer based in a highly rural area. And I think in terms of all this technology, it's been really good. One of the first things I did was move my tutees online, and I meet with all years of the programme as one group. So students who were really disconnected physically were suddenly connected right into the heart of the tutor group. And the other aspect of it was that they felt very connected to the wider world. So we have a heading for events, and students are always flagging up events, and we're going to ridiculous places together that from a little corner of Scotland we would never have got to before. So it's been, in that sense, it's really been able to get my students out there. So I'd be interested to hear if that's what the writers of chapters have been coming up with. The other thing is that students have been much more emotionally connected with each other. They used to just jump into their cars and drive 80 miles back to their homes, but now they're very much part of the group. So we have to discuss as a group, do we continue with this? Is it giving us more connectedness being apart than it would be trying to get us all together? The second thing is that just before lockdown, we ran a conference on rural social work. And people haven't really been writing about that too much recently. So we had another go and we ran a conference on that. And people came from the local area. We tried to put it online. It worked for people in Anchorage, Alaska, but it didn't work for people in Inverness. And what's happened since we've been forced online is the rural social work network has just exploded. And we've had people from Shetland, Orkney, the Western Isles, and the borders and roundabouts. So it's been, for us in little lost corners. This has been really good.
Yeah.
The final thing I'll say is that I was doing a study in the first lockdown about justice social work in Scotland and probation work in France, about how we've both responded to being locked down. And the headlines on that is what's coming out really strongly is one of the things we asked is what makes a good manager at this time? And it comes out as that the good manager is in France is, I don't know, I've never met one. The one in Scotland is saying someone who can deal with my anxiety.
Yeah.
What do you think is a good social worker? A social worker is responding after everything else is taken away to the anxiety and the stress of their service users and setting their own feelings aside. So Autumn was, who I've met before, was talking about poetry. And I think what I wrote as my heading when I was going through this research was dance me through the panic till I'm gathered safely in my tutor group and in Scottish justice practice. So I'm kind of, that's what I've been finding, and perhaps in doing the book chapters, you've been finding similar themes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Gosh, I'm really pleased that rural social work has connected in the way it has, and that technologies have brought that affordance, because they do have lots of affordance. The invention of the internet was always to be for social good, and it, like everything in human existence, we tend to lose our way, and that manifests through the internet. So to hear a real positive experience of that and that connectivity, and again, it's that thing about what do we take forward and what do we leave behind. I've been doing online tutorials for years and years and years, and it's always taken students quite a long time to come into that space. And some of the complaints would have been, I don't want to see my own face. And my argument as an academic tutor wasn't really based on any kind of research other than the fact that you have seen your face for all these amount of years it's been on your head kind of thing. We used to have these debates about whether we could get over this, and there's all these debates about cameras on, cameras off, this sort of thing, interactivity. It's raised so many questions and brought so many experiences to people that, and Gemma's reflected that as well, that we wouldn't have had before. And again, there's a lovely quote, actually, I don't know where I put the book, and I finished my chapter on it, not to indulge, but it's beautiful. And it talks about, it's Roy talking about the pandemic is a portal. And historically, pandemics have forced humans to break with the past and imagine their world anew. This one is no different. It is a portal, a gateway between one world and the next. We can choose to walk through it, dragging our carcasses of prejudice and hatred, our data banks, our dead ideas, our rivers, our smoky skies, put them behind us, or we can walk through it lightly with little luggage, ready to imagine another world. And for social work, this last sentence I think is really key, and to be ready to fight for that. And I think that's really, it was Rua Benjamin, who I've been spending a lot of time listening to around racism through algorithm racism and data mining and scraping and things like that. She had written it in a chapter she had written for a book, and I thought this really needs to be in this book in terms of how we go forward. So John, thank you. I don't know if I've said enough about your contribution. I feel as if it's sold it short, because it in itself is a whole discussion, and maybe this is something you're bringing to us, that we should have more discussions like this as a profession. And if you don't mind, unless anyone else is in to contribute, I would go over to Ben.
I think that might be me. Sorry, this is another issue with technology. So I clicked on the link, and my partner has signed into Teams on my iPad.
Apologies.
So my name's actually Enya.
Hi, Enya.
Hi.
I'm so sorry. That was beyond my digital skills. I'm so sorry.
I know. I just clicked the link and I was like, oh, I think this is my partner's signed in. But okay. So my name's Enya. I'm a student social worker in Plymouth, and that quote was really wonderful that you read at the end of your chapter then, Amanda. And I think that it really highlights for me what I've been thinking about around the pandemic. So for me, the pandemic has been an opportunity to kind of shake the systems that we're in and illuminate the structures that are really pervasive within our society. And I think that another reflection for me within the pandemic has been usually when social work responds to disasters and crisis, we're coming in to a disaster or a crisis. We're not also living that that disaster ourselves. And I feel like with the coronavirus, with COVID, we are also living within this disaster within our day-to-day life. So when we're trying to our self-care and think about our own well-being, which is so paramount for us to be able to do our jobs, and we're working from home and we're also studying from home, and I'm a third-year student now, so it's really tough, and it's so hard to find that balance and how to prioritize. And I've really had to be strong in terms of making sure that I take a lunch break, which is not within the culture of children's social care, and making sure that I, on a weekend, don't just do uni work on Saturday and Sunday, and take a day for myself as well, for my own well-being. Otherwise, I'll just burn out before I've even begun. And I kind of reflect that a little bit upon the fact that we're living this pandemic as well as working the pandemic.
A very good point. Where do you start with that? I think it's a really important point, and I think something to remind each other of often, in terms of kind of our patterns and how they manifest. Does anybody else maybe want to jump in? I kind of feel that I should direct to Ariane. Have you got a view on that in terms of kind of patterns and how do we do our day these days? How are we going to do our day going forward? Are we going to continue to miss our lunch, or are we going to get into this really good pattern of taking our lunch on our weekends?
Yeah, it's so difficult, isn't it? And I sit on the board at Scottish Adoption, and when we're having this discussion this week, because, I suppose it's been, so for their work, it's been wonderful because for parents, you can imagine new adoptive families to have this sort of connection online once the kids are in bed is just absolutely wonderful, and so much more accessible than the way that we would have normally worked of like, come into the office during the working day and let's, see how things are going. But then it means that it's also in workers' houses, isn't it? And for practitioners, I think those boundaries have become hugely blurred, and that's hard enough, I think, as a lecturer, and it feels as though there's no differentiation anymore. But I imagine doing that in practice must feel so much harder. Yeah, much harder. And I suppose again it's the pros and cons and whether we can keep the good bits and address some of the less good bits. But I did want to pick up on like Gemma's point earlier about some of those positives, and it's so easy to forget what we've learned over this last year. And like I've learned so much from you, Amanda, in terms of like digital spaces, ethical technologies, how to navigate those. And you almost like, oh yeah, okay, a year ago I didn't know any of that. I wasn't even thinking about any of that. So I suppose we've got to recognise and acknowledge the learning that we've all sort of gained from this experience, however awful it's been, and what kind of grief and challenge it's brought into people's lives as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Autumn, will you want to jump in with Ariane?
I suppose I wanted to just say something about Denise's chapter. Just thinking as well about loss and grief, and that's running through the chat there too. There's different layers of loss. Some of us have lost people in the pandemic, but we've lost opportunities, we've lost connections. It's been really hard, and I think that we really have to think about how we work with that loss going forward. And I don't, the term recovery is a bit controversial, but figure out a way through to kind of get to the next place, not back to where we were, obviously. And I think, the end of Denise's chapter where she talks about, rituals and ways of working with grief and loss is really helpful to think about how do we do that collectively in our profession, and how do we support each other in the workplace with that as well.
I do think we should, when we get to that place where we're not continually, responding to the crisis, I do think there's going to be a time, and I have written that in another chapter, where we stop and we regroup and we think about, what has just happened to us as well as a profession, but as individuals that make up the sum of the parts. And earlier in the pandemic, Denise and I wrote a blog and did a lot of work around grief in Northern Ireland in particular, and the changes in the grief patterns and rituals there. And it was really quite overwhelming actually to even just to engage in that experience. And I've noticed that lots of people, in terms of making shifts, be it academics, students, practitioners, whoever, within the profession, the shifts they're making are quite dramatic. They're quite big, they're epic type shifts. And I do think at some point we do need to settle into a space. And I've actually, for me tonight, this has felt like a real marker for me, like a real kind of, I talked to Denise about this book being a timestamp in our history as a profession. It sort of has really marked the time for me. And I remember when Denise asked me I was the last person to submit. I was so delayed in my chapter. I was terrible. I was the worst behaved amongst everyone, kind of thing. And but I do now realize kind of how important that kind of, just to talk about it into myself was, even if I'm just talking to myself in the book, I was definitely trying to figure some things out. And I think there is something about, a line in the sand here, this timestamp for us. And actually, I feel having this conversation with all our colleagues and yourselves is a time that we've really kind of tuned in and stopped. This is probably the first time since the pandemic hit, because it's been all about digital technologies for me, and can you fix kind of thing, and what will it do? And I was in a maelstrom too, because, I've been moaning about people using technologies for 12 years, and then everybody wants to use them, and I'm thinking, oh my goodness, I wish I hadn't mentioned this, and here we are, you're here in the middle of it kind of thing. But this is probably one of the first times I've felt still, because I'm in my community with people who I trust to do, social work with. And I feel still, this is probably the first time that I've spent time feeling, I've paused properly in a social work way to think about what has just happened to us as a profession and all the individuals that make up our profession and how we kind of engage with people and people in the world. Those are kind of, Denise, I'm sorry, I've probably stolen your ending or something, but I'm just conscious of the time. I'm conscious of keeping people a long time. I could spend all night. I'm at this point where I'm thinking, a nice cognac and we'll just keep going here. But I'm assuming that we'll want to finish quite soon. So I would be maybe those are my kind of final words. And I don't know, do you want to keep going, or do people want to keep talking? Are there things that we've missed? But certainly I'd be handing over for other people to kind of think about some reflections as we leave the space, kind of thing.
I just wondered, there's still quite a lot of people with their hands up. Could we take just a couple more?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry.
Before we finish. That's fine, Amanda. Yeah, that's.
So I can see one more. Rachel, you've got your hand up? Oh, no hands.
Oh, no, yeah, I had, but Andrew had his hand up for a lot longer than me, so I'll hand it over to Andrew first.
Okay, no problem. Sorry, I didn't see those.
Rachel, that's very kind of you. I mean, we were talking about the student experience when I first raised my hand, and there's a lot of input from either side on the chat, from the student side and the lecturer side. But I think it's really important to recognise the pace at which everyone had to adapt to that change and had to adapt their learning or teaching styles. My wife is a teacher, and seeing the amount of work that went on to converting a lesson into an online lesson, I understand very much the pressures that it had on everyone, but also for students taking time to assimilate the information in that new way, particularly if their particular learning style wasn't attuned to that way of learning. And there's lots, I consider myself to be extremely blessed as a student. I'd managed to just complete my first placement at the point where we went into lockdown. And although there were still assignments still to do, we had good access to online resources and some lenience in terms of deadlines. But a lot of my colleagues had the same experience of the structural inequalities that service users face in terms of the space that they had in which to learn, the technology they had with which to learn, the financial situation that they were in as a part, either because a partner who had become the main income earner was no longer able to earn, or because they were ill. So I'm very lucky and very blessed that I've had a fairly, in inverted commas, easy ride through this. And I've been blessed in my second placement. I've actually been able to go in, because I'm in a hospital discharge team, and work with and meet service users and colleagues. So I still have those water cooler moments that we were talking about earlier. but I'm very conscious. There's a kind of survivor guilt here because I'm getting such a better experience than all of my colleagues are in many respects. And I said, if you look at get the opportunity to look at our chapter, Francis's story, I think is particularly moving. And he and I presented to the borough in which we're placed today about our contribution to the book. And in that, I said that I was humbled in the face of what he had achieved in the circumstances that he was facing. And I think it's important to recognise that every student and every lecturer's abilities coming into it were different, and abilities coming out of it will be different, but everyone is trying their best.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thank you for that, Andrea, and well done presenting today. Thank you for sharing your experiences. And you're right, everybody's experiences have been different, and it's not to disenfranchise anybody's experience, isn't it? It's about really listening carefully. All those things that we learned to do as social work students, or teach social work students to do now, to really think carefully and tune into other people's experiences of this pandemic. Thank you for that. Rachel, I just don't want to make the mistake of passing you by again. I'm really sorry about that. So can I just bring you in then?
That's all right. I'm not gonna keep anybody. To be honest, it's more just a shout out and thank you to everybody for contributing. It's really helped me hear about other people's experiences, because mine, particularly during this pandemic, has been very tough. I haven't been fortunate to go into my placement. It's been majority from home. So I have had moments where I felt very isolated, anxiety riddled. But at the same time, it has allowed me to see, the positives of it, because I am starting to do self-care activities more than I did before this pandemic. And I'm in my final year, and I know how crucial it is to take care of ourselves before we can support others, because ultimately we need to take care of ourselves before we can support others. So it's really helped in a way. That's not to say it's still not tough, and I absolutely agree with Denise. I don't think it's going to go back to normal. I'm doing the quotations with my fingers. So yeah, it is just about sort of moving forward and how we can all adapt. I'm hoping one day that I do even get to work one day in an office. All those observational skills, those social skills, I feel like I'm still doing them, but it's, a lot of the time I've not even spoken to clients, I've not met my clients, and it's that social interaction, that relationship, that humanity that I'm really struggling and I'm missing. Yeah. But no, thank you for everyone contributing. It's really made me feel human. It's made me feel like I'm definitely not alone in this. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you, Rachel. And those are really important points. We assume, and some of the learning I learned actually about screen relations. I've been reading a lot about screen relations, functional equivalence, a lot of the things that we talked about in the Anna Freud talk, Nicola and Gemma, with Aaron, was about that idea that these spaces are not functionally equivalent, and we should not aspire to do the same thing in these spaces that we do in the world, because this is different from the world as we know it, and it will change, and we will change with it, and we will adapt with it. I think that's kind of where my assurance is that everything would be all right at the start of the pandemic, was that social work respond all the time historically to changes in social need, the presentation of people, presentation of us, the sociological context in which we work changes all the time. And that's where I held my faith, and I really held on to the fact that we're going to be able to do this. If no one else is going to be able to do the world right now, social work will, because that's our bread and butter kind of thing. So thank you for your contributions. Colleagues, I'm just conscious of the time and people dropping off and maybe needing to get on. I just wondered, could we probably just a sentence from each of us? Mine would be, thank you so much for spending time with us this evening. It's a huge privilege to do this and to share a space with colleagues. I could do this quite often, and it's just been such a lovely space to be in. So I think if we could maybe just a few words from everybody, the authors who are with us, that would be great. I don't mind what kind of order you want to go in.
Okay, so I would quite like to go last, Amanda. So Gemma, do you want to say something?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you very much. It's been really great to be here, and I really value this space, and hopefully there'll be more like this and more spaces to talk together and be able to kind of, yeah, share that learning. So hopefully I'll see you all again soon.
Thank you, Gemma.
Ariane?
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much. It's been a really lovely evening, and just yeah, I feel like it's kind of brought all the elements of the book together, you know, the sort of positives, the learning, the catharsis, the escapism of literature, just all of those wonderful aspects of the book. So thanks everyone for joining us. It's really nice to hear from people about your experiences.
And Autumn?
Yeah, I just feel so proud to be a social worker and to be among social work academics and social work students and practitioners in the field. And I hope you can feel the love today for social work in some measure, because we need that, we deserve that, and just keep on keeping on and look after each other and read poetry. It does help.
And Amanda, I would just, I know you said a minute, but I just, I'll just be slightly longer. And I just wanted to say, just to reflect on some of what's been said today. And you did pinch my ending, Amanda, by saying that you described the book as a timestamp. And that was really meaningful for me. And I think I didn't realise at the beginning of all this how much of a timestamp it would be, because none of us knew. And I think that's really been reflected in the discussion today. And I just wanted to mention, as many of you will know, my research area is bereavement and loss. There is a theorist called Thomas Attig who talks about relearning the world. And as I've been listening to everybody's discussions today, I've just been thinking of his writing, actually, and how we are all faced with relearning the world in some kind of way, whether, you know, that's positive, negative, you know, whatever labels we put on it, we have relearning to do. And the other thing that struck me, my friend and colleague Sharon Lamley put in the chat about, you know, managers and those who have authority. I think that there's also been a strand around power that's been running through this discussion tonight. And I think that one of the ways that I would like to see us relearning the world is to think about the power relationships that we have, whatever, you know, whether those are to do with social inequality or race or whatever, just to be thinking about, you know, and us as social workers as well, how we use our authority, and as lecturers too. So and I just want to finish by saying that what I've said already, really, which is that this book was an enormous pleasure to put together. There wasn't one sort of bad moment, and it's very unusual to get a group of people together, I think, and just not have anything apart from Amanda with the lateness of her chapter.
This is actually a truth. This is you. Or this
no,
is true.
not true. And Amanda and I know each other very well. So I just want to say that I think the warmth that went into the book, I have felt really reflected here this evening. And for myself, I just can't think of a better way of you know, celebrating the spirit Ubuntu of World Social Work Day than to be here with these people, and just to thank everybody so much for their contributions to the book, to Baswa and to Ruth Allen, particularly for writing the foreword, and for all your support, Liz, and the support that we've been given, and to everybody here this evening. And finally, just again to say thank you so much to you, Amanda, and to Queens, and to Laura and the team for putting this on this evening. You know, if you hadn't been here, Laura, then I think we would have all had cat filters on or whatever, you know. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
Absolutely.
And finally, one of the things that somebody who was a practitioner that I was working with said to me was that one of the things that we have lost is the saying goodbye. So that when we say goodbye, we no longer leave the building, we no longer drift out together, we no longer go home, meet people on the train. When we say goodbye, we press the leave button and we're suddenly cut off and put back into our reality, in our other reality. And I think that I just want to sort of say that before we are all put into that position, because it's a strange one, I think. You know,
so I think we should all just say thank you and goodbye, isn't it?
Yeah.
So thank you
so
very much.
Thank you to everybody for being here this evening. Take care.
Thank you.
5 goodbyes.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Brilliant. Bye, everyone.